November 8, 1944. A farmhouse near Metz, France. Hauptmann Ernst Weber of the 111th Panzer Brigade sat hunched over a captured American technical manual, his hands trembling slightly as he translated the ballistic tables. The document, recovered from a destroyed Sherman near Aracourt 6 weeks earlier, contained performance data for the American 76mm M1 gun-firing M62 armor-piercing rounds. What Weber found in those carefully typed columns would shatter assumptions that had sustained German panzer crews since 1942. The numbers indicated that American 76mm guns could penetrate the frontal armor of the Panzer IV at ranges exceeding 2,000 yards. 2,000 yards. The Panzer IV, Germany's most produced tank with over 8,500 units built, the reliable workhorse of every panzer division, suddenly appeared vulnerable to weapons German intelligence had dismissed as inadequate. The psychological impact of this discovery rippled through German armoured units faster than any tactical directive could travel. Crews who had trusted their frontal armour now faced the realization that American medium tanks posed a lethal threat at distances where German doctrine assumed complete safety. The story of how German tank crews learned their most common fighting vehicle could be defeated by American guns they had underestimated begins not with combat encounters, but with fragments of intelligence gathered from battlefields across France, pieced together by officers who recognized patterns their high command had failed to see. In early 1944, the German army faced a deteriorating strategic situation that military planning could no longer ignore. Allied forces had landed in Normandy. Soviet armies were crushing German defensive lines across the Eastern Front. American industrial production had reached levels that exceeded Germany's output by factors German economists found difficult to calculate accurately. Yet German tank doctrine still rested on assumptions formed during the successful years of 1940 and 1941, when German armour had achieved remarkable victories through superior tactics and adequate technical capabilities. The Panzer IV had served as Germany's primary medium tank since the invasion of Poland in 1939. Originally designed as an infantry support vehicle armed with a short-barreled 75mm gun, the Panzer IV evolved through successive modifications into a capable anti-tank platform. By 1942, the Ausführung F2 variant mounted the long-barreled 75mm Kar 40 gun that could destroy most Allied tanks at combat ranges. German crews trusted the Panzer IV because it worked. Unlike the temperamental Panther with its frequent mechanical failures, or the Tiger with its enormous appetite for fuel and spare parts, the Panzer IV functioned reliably under field conditions. Crews could perform basic maintenance with standard tools. Transmissions lasted thousands of kilometers. Engines ran without constant adjustment. In an army increasingly plagued by mechanical unreliability across its newer tank designs, the Panzer IV represented dependable German engineering that simply worked when needed. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The Panzer IV Ausführung H, the most common variant in service during 1944, carried armour protection that reflected German design philosophy from earlier in the war. The frontal hull armour measured 80mm thick, arranged vertically without the sloped configuration that provided the Panther and Soviet T-34 with improved ballistic protection. The turret front measured 50mm of base armour with an additional 30mm appliqué plate bolted on, creating 80mm of effective thickness. This armour configuration had proven adequate against most Allied tank guns encountered through 1943. British tanks armed with 2-pounder and 6-pounder guns could not reliably penetrate Panzer IV frontal armour at combat ranges. Soviet 76.2mm guns on T-34, model 1941 tanks, struggled against the frontal aspect unless firing at very close range. American 75mm guns, mounted on early Sherman tanks, could not achieve frontal penetrations, except at extremely close distances, typically under 300 meters. German intelligence assessments through mid-1944 consistently underestimated American armored capabilities. Reports emphasized that American tanks prioritized reliability and ease of production over combat effectiveness. Intelligence summaries noted that Sherman tanks possessed adequate mobility but inferior armor protection and inadequate firepower compared to German designs. These assessments created dangerous complacency among German tank crews, who believed their armor provided safety against American weapons. The introduction of the American 76mm gun in mid-1944 received minimal attention in German intelligence briefings initially. Officers noted that Americans had deployed improved Shermans mounting longer guns, but initial assessments suggested this represented incremental improvement rather than fundamental threat increase. German crews were told the new American gun remained inferior to German tank armament and posed limited danger to properly employed German armor. This assessment proved catastrophically wrong. The 76mm M1 gun represented a substantial leap in American anti-tank capability. Developed in response to concerns about Sherman inadequacy against German heavy armor, the new gun fired ammunition with significantly improved penetrating power compared to the 75mm it replaced. The M62 armor-piercing capped round achieved muzzle velocity of 792 meters per second, delivering kinetic energy sufficient to defeat armor substantially thicker than what German intelligence had calculated. American ordnance testing conducted at Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland provided comprehensive data on 76mm penetration performance. Testing against armor plates of various thicknesses and angles produced ballistic tables that quantified exactly what the gun could defeat at specific ranges. These tables, printed in technical manuals distributed to American tank crews, contained information German intelligence desperately needed, but had not obtained through conventional espionage or battlefield capture. The Battle of Aracourt in September 1944 provided German forces with their first sustained combat experience against 76mm armed Shermans in significant numbers. American 4th Armored Division, spearheading General Patton's Third Army advance toward the German border, encountered German counterattacks by newly formed panzer brigades, equipped primarily with Panther tanks. The 11-day battle resulted in decisive American victory, with German forces losing approximately 86 tanks and assault guns against American losses of 25 Shermans and 7 tank destroyers. German after-action reports from Aracourt noted with alarm that American tanks demonstrated improved firepower capability. Several Panther tanks had been penetrated frontally at ranges German crews considered safe. Some reports mentioned smaller entry holes than expected, suggesting specialized ammunition. Intelligence officers examining destroyed German tanks found evidence of tungsten core projectiles, confirming that Americans had deployed high-velocity armor-piercing ammunition similar to German Panzergranate 40 rounds. But the focus on HVAP ammunition obscured a more fundamental threat that German intelligence initially missed. Standard M62 ammunition, far more common than scarce tungsten core rounds, possessed sufficient penetrating power to defeat Panzer IV armor at ranges. German doctrine assumed provided safety. The ballistic tables recovered from destroyed American vehicles near Aracourt contained this information in stark numerical form, but the documents took weeks to reach officers who understood their implications. Hauptmann Weber's discovery of the American technical manual in early November came through routine intelligence processing rather than dramatic battlefield capture. The document had been recovered from a knocked-out Sherman during the Aracourt fighting, sent through normal channels to division intelligence, then forwarded to brigade headquarters, where it sat for several days before Weber, who had studied English before the war, began systematic translation. The manual's ballistic tables listed penetration values for M62, ammunition at various ranges against armor plates of different thicknesses arranged at different angles. Weber cross-referenced these numbers against known Panzer IV armor specifications. The calculations produced results that seemed impossible initially. According to American data, the 76mm gun-firing standard ammunition could penetrate 80 millimeters of vertical armor at distances up to 2,000 meters. 2,000 meters represented the practical engagement range for most tank combat in the relatively open terrain of eastern France and western Germany. Weber rechecked his calculations repeatedly, hoping he had made conversion errors between American and German measurement systems. The numbers remained consistent. American 76mm guns posed a lethal threat to Panzer IVs at ranges where German crews believed themselves safe from American fire. The implications extended far beyond simple tactical adjustments. The Panzer IV formed the backbone of German armoured divisions in late 1944. With Panther production unable to meet demand and Tiger tanks available only in limited numbers, Panzer divisions relied heavily on Panzer IVs to provide their primary combat strength. A typical Panzer division in autumn 1944 might possess 40 to 50 Panthers if fully equipped, but would field twice as many Panzer IVs. Some divisions possessed almost no Panthers at all, depending entirely on Panzer IVs for their tank strength. If Panzer IVs were vulnerable to standard American tank guns at normal combat ranges, German armoured units faced a fundamental crisis in combat effectiveness. The realization forced reconsideration of tactics, deployment patterns, and engagement doctrines that had developed over years of combat experience. German tank doctrine emphasized first-shot capability achieved through superior optics, crew training, and tactical positioning. Panzer units trained to identify enemy tanks at maximum range, maneuver to favorable positions, and destroy opponents before they could respond effectively. This doctrine assumed that German tanks possessed armor protection adequate to survive return fire, while crews acquired targets and fired follow-up shots. Against Soviet tanks with relatively weak guns or early American Shermans with 75mm weapons, this assumption held true. Panzer IV crews could engage enemies from positions where return fire posed minimal danger, trading shots from range while protected by frontal armor that enemy guns could not penetrate reliably. The 76mm gun eliminated this advantage. American Shermans could now penetrate Panzer IV frontal armor at the same ranges where German guns could destroy Shermans. The engagement became a matter of who spotted the enemy first and who fired the first accurate shot, rather than a technical mismatch where German armor provided inherent protection. This leveling of capabilities fundamentally altered the tactical mathematics of armored combat. Weber's report climbed through German command channels during November 1944, reaching officers responsible for armored doctrine and training. Initial reactions ranged from skepticism to alarm. Some officers questioned whether American ballistic data could be trusted, suggesting the penetration values might represent theoretical maximums rather than practical battlefield performance. Others argued that American crews lacked the training and skill to achieve consistent hits at 2,000-meter ranges, making the theoretical penetration capability irrelevant. Combat reports from German units engaged against American armor through late 1944 gradually confirmed Weber's analysis. Panzer IV losses to frontal penetrations increased as American tank crews gained experience with their 76mm guns and learned proper employment techniques. German tank commanders reported that American Shermans were engaging at longer ranges than previously observed, taking shots that German doctrine had assumed were beyond American capability. Examination of destroyed Panzer IVs revealed entry holes consistent with 76mm ammunition, striking at velocities sufficient for penetration. Intelligence officers documented impacts on frontal armor that had defeated the 80mm thickness, punching through plates that should have provided protection. The physical evidence matched the ballistic tables Weber had translated, confirming that American technical data accurately represented gun performance. The psychological impact on German tank crews proved as significant as the tactical implications. Panzer IV crews had relied on their frontal armor as protection that allowed them to close with enemy tanks and engage from positions of strength. Learning that this protection was illusory against weapons they would certainly face created profound unease among veteran crews and deepened the defeatism that had begun spreading through German armoured units during the difficult summer fighting in Normandy. Crew morale depended partly on confidence in equipment. Soldiers who trusted their tanks fought more aggressively, took necessary risks, and maintained combat effectiveness under pressure. Soldiers who doubted their equipment's adequacy became cautious, hesitant, and prone to breaking under stress. The revelation that Panzer IVs offered no frontal protection against standard American guns eroded the confidence German crews needed to function effectively in combat. German tactical responses to the 76mm threat evolved through late 1944 and into 1945, but remained constrained by strategic realities that limited options available to unit commanders. The ideal response would have been replacing Panzer IVs with Panthers, or better tanks possessing armor protection adequate against American guns. This proved impossible given Germany's production capabilities and the catastrophic losses German armored forces had sustained across all fronts during summer and autumn 1944. Panther production through 1944 never exceeded 400 units monthly, despite maximum industrial effort. Total Panther production for the entire year reached approximately 3,900 units. This sounds substantial until compared against German tank losses. In July 1944 alone, German forces lost over 1,000 tanks and assault guns across all fronts. August losses exceeded 1,000 units. September losses approached 700 units. The arithmetic was brutally simple. Germany could not replace losses, much less expand armoured strength to meet strategic requirements. Panzer IV production continued at higher rates than Panther production through most of 1944, reaching approximately 3,000 units for the year. This made the Panzer IV essential to maintaining any German armoured capability despite its newly recognised vulnerabilities. German commanders could not simply withdraw Panzer IVs from service when no adequate replacements existed. Units had to continue employing tanks they now knew were vulnerable, adapting tactics to compensate for technical inadequacy. Tactical guidance issued to panzer units in late 1944 emphasized defensive positioning that maximized whatever advantages Panzer IVs retained. Crews were instructed to avoid frontal engagements at ranges where American guns could penetrate, instead maneuvering to present minimal target profiles and engaging from hull-down positions that exposed only the turret. Commanders emphasized the importance of first-shot kills, since German crews could not rely on armor protection to survive return fire if initial shots missed. These tactical adaptations required terrain that provided defensive advantages, time to prepare positions, and enemy cooperation in attacking into prepared defenses. German forces rarely enjoyed all three conditions simultaneously in late 1944. Allied offensives pushed German units back continuously, denying time for careful defensive preparation. American forces increasingly refused to conduct frontal assaults into prepared positions, instead calling for artillery and airstrikes to neutralize German strongpoints before advancing. The Battle of the Bulge in December 1944 provided German panzer forces with their final major offensive operation of the war. German High Command committed virtually all available armoured reserves to this desperate gamble, hoping to split Allied armies and capture the vital port of Antwerp. The offensive employed approximately 1,700 tanks and assault guns, representing Germany's maximum armoured striking power assembled through stripping other fronts and committing final reserves. Panzer IV units participated heavily in the Bulge offensive, comprising significant portions of the attacking armoured strength. German planning assumed that surprise, winter weather limiting Allied air superiority, and overwhelming local numerical advantage would compensate for technical disadvantages German tanks now faced. The offensive achieved initial surprise and tactical success, penetrating American defensive lines and advancing toward objectives. But American forces recovered from initial shock rapidly, committing reserves and establishing defensive positions that channeled German advances into killing zones. Sherman tanks, including substantial numbers mounting 76mm guns, engaged German armour in close-range fighting, where Panzer IV vulnerabilities became devastatingly apparent. American tank destroyers, equipped with 90mm guns, proved even more lethal, destroying German tanks at ranges where return fire was ineffective. German panzer crews in the Bulge encountered American armoured units far more competent and confident than intelligence assessments had predicted. American tank crews had gained 6 months of combat experience since Normandy, learning proper employment of their 76mm guns and developing combined arms tactics that leveraged American advantages in artillery support and air power when weather permitted. The fighting demonstrated conclusively that technical improvements to American armor had created capability German intelligence had failed to appreciate. Panzer IV losses during the Bulge offensive proved catastrophic. By early January 1945, when German forces withdrew from their maximum penetration, hundreds of German tanks had been destroyed or abandoned. Many Panzer IVs were lost to frontal penetrations by American 76mm guns at ranges German doctrine had assumed provided safety. Crews who survived these encounters carried back reports that confirmed what Weber's analysis had predicted months earlier. The American gun could defeat Panzer IV armor reliably at normal combat ranges. German tank crews could not depend on frontal armor for protection. Engagements became battles of who fired first and most accurately. Contests German crews increasingly lost as American proficiency improved, and German crew quality declined due to casualties, eliminating experienced veterans. By February 1945, German armoured forces had been shattered beyond any possibility of reconstitution. Fuel shortages immobilised tanks that mechanical failures had not already disabled. Spare parts became unobtainable as Allied bombing destroyed factories and transportation networks. Crew replacements arrived with minimal training, often sent into combat after only weeks of instruction on equipment they barely understood. The German army that had pioneered armoured warfare and demonstrated its effectiveness from 1939 through 1942 now struggled to field armoured units capable of elementary tactical operations. The Panzer IV, once the reliable backbone of German panzer divisions, had become a liability that units continued employing only because nothing better was available in sufficient numbers. Crews knew their armour would not protect them. They understood that American guns could destroy their tanks at any range where combat occurred. This knowledge destroyed morale and combat effectiveness as thoroughly as enemy fire destroyed the physical vehicles. German intelligence reports from early 1945 painted an increasingly desperate picture of armoured combat capability. Units reported operational readiness rates below 30%, with mechanical failures and fuel shortages eliminating more tanks than enemy action. Panzer IV units specifically documented that crews were abandoning tanks at first sign of engine trouble or mechanical problems, unwilling to risk capture while attempting repairs in combat zones, where American forces controlled terrain and could call for overwhelming artillery or air support. The reports noted that crew quality had declined severely, with replacement personnel lacking adequate training or experience. Young soldiers arriving from training schools had learned to operate tanks on drill fields, but possessed no understanding of tactical employment or combat survival techniques that veterans had accumulated through bitter experience. These inexperienced crews made mistakes that got them killed rapidly when engaging American forces equipped with weapons that could destroy German tanks reliably. Intelligence assessments acknowledged that American tank crews had achieved rough parity with German crews in tactical proficiency by early 1945. American tankers possessed 6 to 9 months of sustained combat experience, having learned their craft through continuous operations from Normandy to the German border. They understood their equipment capabilities and limitations. They had developed effective, combined arms tactics that leveraged American advantages in artillery, air support, and logistics. Most critically, American crews had learned that they could defeat German tanks, including Panzer IVs that German propaganda had portrayed as superior to Allied armour. This confidence showed in more aggressive tactics, willingness to engage German armour directly, and effective exploitation of tactical advantages. The psychological transformation of American tank crews from cautious defenders in Normandy to confident attackers by early 1945 mirrored the psychological collapse of German tank crews who had lost faith in their equipment and their chances for survival. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The technical analysis of why 76mm ammunition could defeat Panzer IV armour requires understanding both the projectile characteristics and the armor protection the gun faced. The M62 armor-piercing capped round used a relatively simple design that nevertheless proved highly effective against armor of the thickness and arrangement the Panzer IV presented. The projectile consisted of a hardened steel penetrator with a ballistic cap that improved aerodynamic performance and helped prevent the penetrator from shattering on impact against face-hardened armor. The round weighed approximately 15 pounds and achieved muzzle velocity of 792 meters per second when fired from the 76mm M1 gun. This combination of mass and velocity delivered kinetic energy sufficient to defeat homogeneous armor approximately 109mm thick at 1,000 meters range when striking at perpendicular angle. The Panzer IV's frontal armor measured 80mm thick, arranged vertically or near vertically. This represented substantially less effective thickness than the 109mm the 76mm gun could defeat. The vertical arrangement provided no ballistic advantage from sloping that might have increased effective thickness or promoted ricochet. German designers had arranged Panzer IV armor vertically to maximize internal volume and simplify manufacturing, accepting the ballistic disadvantage this created. American ordnance testing demonstrated that M62 rounds could penetrate 80mm of vertical armor plate reliably at ranges up to 2,200 yards, approximately 2,000 meters. Beyond this distance, penetration became increasingly uncertain as projectile velocity decreased and the probability of the penetrator shattering on impact increased. But at any range under 2,000 meters, properly aimed M62 rounds would penetrate Panzer IV frontal armor with high confidence. The tungsten core HVAP ammunition that received so much attention in German intelligence reports offered even better performance, penetrating approximately 160mm at 1,000 yards. But HVAP scarcity meant most American tank crews relied primarily on standard M62 ammunition for the vast majority of their combat engagements. The standard round proved entirely adequate for defeating Panzer IV armor, making the specialized ammunition unnecessary against this particular threat. German armor metallurgy in 1944 and 1945 had deteriorated from earlier war standards due to critical shortages of alloying elements, particularly molybdenum and nickel. These materials improved armor, toughness, and resistance to fracture. But Germany's access to both had been severely restricted by loss of territory and disruption of trade routes. Armor plates produced in late 1944 often contained reduced quantities of critical alloys, resulting in more brittle steel that fractured more easily when struck by high-velocity projectiles. Testing of captured Panzer IV armor, plates by American and British metallurgists, after the war confirmed that German armor quality had declined measurably. Plates showed increased tendency to spalling, where fragments of armor broke away from the interior surface, even when penetration did not occur. This spalling created lethal projectiles inside the tank that killed or wounded crew members, even when the attacking round did not fully penetrate. German crews increasingly reported casualties from armor fragments rather than from projectiles that achieved complete penetration. The combat results of Panzer IV vulnerability to 76mm guns appeared clearly in unit loss statistics from late 1944 and early 1945. German armored units engaged against American forces reported loss rates substantially higher than units facing Soviet forces equipped with comparable weapons. This discrepancy reflected partly the concentrated presence of American 76mm armed Shermans in the Western Theater, but also reflected improved American crew training and more effective combined arms coordination. Specific engagement reports documented the pattern repeatedly. Panzer IV units attempting to defend positions against American armored advances consistently suffered heavy losses when American forces could bring their 76mm guns to bear at ranges of 1,000 to 2,000 meters. German defensive tactics that relied on armor protection to allow crews time to acquire targets and fire accurately failed when that armor protection proved inadequate against standard American ammunition. The engagement near Hatten-Rittershofen in January 1945 illustrated the deadly effectiveness of American 76mm guns against Panzer IV formations. German forces launched counterattacks attempting to eliminate American penetrations into the Alsace region, committing substantial armoured forces including multiple Panzer IV battalions. American 14th Armoured Division defended positions with Sherman tanks, including numerous 76mm armed variants that had replaced earlier 75mm models. The battle devolved into close-range urban combat, where German tactical advantages in crew training and equipment sophistication meant little. American Shermans engaged Panzer IVs at ranges of 500 to 1,000 meters across village streets and through gaps between buildings. At these distances, 76mm guns destroyed Panzer IVs with single shots through frontal armor, turret faces, and hull sides. German crews found no safe angle of approach that protected their vehicles from American fire. Survivors from the German 21st Panzer Division reported that American tank fire proved devastatingly accurate and effective. Panzer IVs that attempted to advance through village streets were knocked out before crews could identify targets and return fire. Tanks that took defensive positions found themselves engaged from unexpected angles by American forces who maneuvered aggressively to create favorable firing positions. The battle cost German forces dozens of tanks destroyed in exchange for limited tactical gains that were abandoned within days when American counterattacks made continued defense untenable. Similar patterns repeated across the Western Front through the final months of the war. German Panzer IV units committed to defensive operations found themselves unable to hold positions against American armored forces that employed 76mm guns effectively. The combination of American numerical superiority, artillery support, air superiority when weather permitted, and tank guns that could defeat German armor at normal combat ranges proved overwhelming. German tank commanders interviewed after the war consistently mentioned American firepower improvements as a critical factor that complicated their tactical situation from autumn 1944 onward. The 76mm gun eliminated assumptions about frontal armor protection that had shaped German tactical thinking. Crews could no longer rely on armor to survive engagement with enemy tanks while acquiring targets and returning fire. Every engagement became potentially lethal, regardless of angle or range within normal combat distances. This psychological burden affected crew performance measurably. Veteran tankers who had survived months or years of combat understood that their luck would eventually run out. Knowing that their tanks offered no reliable protection against standard enemy weapons deepened the fatalism that spread through German armoured units as the war entered its final phase. Replacement crews arriving with minimal training recognized immediately that their chances of survival were minimal, creating morale problems that commanders could not address through leadership or tactical adjustments. The strategic implications of Panzer IV. Vulnerability extended beyond immediate tactical defeats. Germany's armoured forces represented the primary mobile reserve capable of responding to Allied breakthrough attempts and conducting counter-offensives that might stabilize deteriorating front lines. If these armoured forces could not effectively engage Allied tanks due to inadequate armour protection and increasingly inferior crew quality, German defensive strategy lost its foundation. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, Commander-in-Chief West, recognized this reality in his assessments to German High Command. Reports from January 1945 noted that German armoured units could no longer reliably conduct offensive operations or effective mobile defence against Allied forces that possessed overwhelming material superiority and increasingly sophisticated combined arms coordination. The reports acknowledged that German tanks, particularly Panzer IVs that formed the majority of available armoured strength, faced American weapons that negated any protection their armour provided. German armoured doctrine had emphasized quality over quantity, assuming that superior German tanks and better-trained crews could defeat numerically superior but technically inferior Allied forces. This assumption had proven valid in some circumstances earlier in the war, when German advantages in tactics, training, and equipment quality remained substantial. By late 1944, all three advantages had eroded to the point where German armoured units possessed no meaningful superiority over their Allied opponents. American tank crews had achieved rough parity in tactical proficiency through sustained combat experience. American tanks, while still not matching German heavy armor in pure technical specifications, possessed adequate firepower to engage German tanks effectively at combat ranges. Most critically, American forces employed their armor within a combined arms system that leveraged overwhelming advantages in artillery, air power, logistics, and industrial production to create battlefield conditions where individual tank technical specifications mattered far less than operational effectiveness. The Panzer IV's evolution from adequate medium tank to vulnerable liability reflected broader German strategic failures that doomed the Third Reich, regardless of tactical developments. Germany had entered the war possessing temporary advantages in doctrine, training, and operational art that enabled remarkable victories from 1939 through 1942. These advantages masked fundamental weaknesses in industrial capacity, resource access, and sustainable military power projection. By 1944, temporary advantages had evaporated while fundamental weaknesses remained and intensified. Allied industrial production exceeded German output by ratios that made sustained conventional warfare unwinnable. Allied technological development had matched or exceeded German capabilities across most weapon categories. Allied operational doctrine had evolved through combat experience to exploit their material advantages effectively. Germany possessed no path to military victory once these realities crystallized. The Panzer IV story exemplified this broader strategic reality. German engineers had designed an adequate tank that served effectively within the operational context of early war combat. As Allied capabilities improved and German resources declined, the Panzer IV's adequacy eroded until the tank became actively dangerous to crews who had no choice but to continue operating equipment they knew was obsolete. This pattern repeated across German military forces, where equipment designed for earlier war conditions proved increasingly inadequate for the combat environment of late 1944 and 1945. German armoured forces in the final months struggled not just with inadequate equipment, but with cascading systemic failures that made effective combat operations impossible. Fuel shortages immobilized tanks regardless of their technical capabilities. Spare parts became unobtainable as factories were destroyed and transportation networks collapsed. Ammunition supplies ran short as industrial production declined and logistics broke down. Crew quality plummeted as casualties eliminated experienced veterans and replacement training systems produced barely competent operators. Panzer IV units attempting to conduct operations in this environment faced impossible challenges. Tanks that reached the battlefield often had insufficient fuel for sustained combat. Guns lacked adequate ammunition for prolonged engagement. Crews possessed minimal training and no combat experience. Maintenance personnel could not obtain parts needed for repairs. Recovery vehicles could not reach disabled tanks due to Allied air supremacy and artillery dominance. The cumulative effect made German armoured units ineffective regardless of individual tank technical specifications. American forces exploiting these German weaknesses achieved battlefield dominance that reflected superior operational systems rather than just superior equipment. American tank crews operated within a logistics system that provided fuel, ammunition, spare parts, and maintenance support reliably. Artillery support could be called upon rapidly through effective radio communications and responsive fire direction centers. Air support, when weather permitted, could be directed against German positions with devastating accuracy. Medical evacuation retrieved wounded crew members rapidly, improving survival rates and maintaining morale. This systematic approach to armoured warfare made individual tank technical specifications less critical than the Germans had assumed. A Sherman with adequate but not exceptional armour and firepower, supported by effective logistics, artillery, air power, and combined arms coordination, proved far more combat effective than a technically superior German tank operating without adequate support. The Americans had built an operational system that won battles. The Germans had built impressive individual weapons that could not overcome systemic failure. The revelation that 76mm guns could defeat Panzer IV armour represented just one element of German strategic collapse, but it symbolized the broader pattern clearly. German intelligence had underestimated American capabilities, assuming that American industrial focus on mass production meant acceptance of technical inferiority. This assumption proved false. American industry produced massive quantities of equipment, while simultaneously improving quality and performance continuously based on combat feedback. The 76mm gun exemplified this American approach. Recognizing that the 75mm gun lacked adequate anti-tank performance against German heavy armor, American ordnance engineers designed an improved weapon and brought it into production within months. By autumn 1944, thousands of 76mm armed Shermans served in Europe, providing American tank crews with firepower adequate to engage any German tank they would encounter. German industry, by contrast, struggled to maintain production of existing designs and could not respond rapidly to changing combat requirements. German officers examining American equipment captured during the Battle of the Bulge expressed grudging respect for American industrial achievement. Technical reports noted that American tanks, while less sophisticated in some respects than German designs, demonstrated excellent automotive reliability, ease of maintenance, and design margins that allowed continuous improvement without complete redesign. The reports acknowledged that American industry had solved problems German engineers considered intractable given wartime constraints. The 76mm gun installation on Sherman tanks impressed German technical officers who examined captured vehicles. American engineers had modified the Sherman turret to accommodate the larger gun without requiring complete vehicle redesign, demonstrating engineering flexibility and production adaptability. The installation maintained full turret traverse, adequate ammunition stowage, and acceptable crew working conditions. German engineers noted this contrasted sharply with German experience, where gun upgrades typically required extensive vehicle modifications and production delays. March 1945 brought the final collapse of organized German resistance in the West as Allied forces crossed the Rhine and advanced into the German heartland. German armored units that had survived the winter fighting possessed minimal combat power, with most formations reduced to company or platoon strength. Panzer IV units numbered their operational vehicles in single digits, supported by logistics systems that could no longer provide fuel, ammunition, or maintenance. The few Panzer IVs that remained operational fought defensive actions against overwhelming Allied superiority, attempting to delay advances that could not be stopped. Crews understood they were fighting a lost war in equipment that offered no protection against weapons they faced daily. Survival became a matter of luck rather than skill or equipment quality. Most crews who remained with their tanks through March and April 1945 died or were captured before Germany's surrender on May 8. The story of German crews discovering their Panzer IV vulnerability to American 76mm guns illustrates how intelligence failures, doctrinal rigidity, and industrial inadequacy combined to doom German armoured forces, regardless of individual crew courage or tactical skill. Weber's analysis in November 1944 revealed a truth that German High Command could not address through tactical adjustments or operational changes. The fundamental inadequacy of German equipment and the systematic superiority of Allied operational methods made German defeat inevitable. German tank crews who survived the war carried memories of fighting in vehicles they knew could not protect them, against enemies whose material advantages proved insurmountable. Panzer IV veterans recalled the grinding realization that their tanks offered no safety, that every engagement might be their last, and that the war's outcome had been determined by industrial and material factors beyond their control. These memories shaped post-war German military thinking, emphasizing that future conflicts required not just capable weapons, but sustainable industrial systems and realistic strategic planning. The American 76mm gun achieved its battlefield dominance, not through revolutionary technology, but through competent engineering, applied within an industrial system capable of mass production and continuous improvement. The gun gave American tank crews adequate firepower to engage German armor effectively, transforming the tactical balance and eliminating German advantages that had existed earlier in the war. Combined with American superiority in numbers, logistics, artillery, and air power, the 76mm gun helped create battlefield conditions where German armoured forces could not function effectively. The Panzer IV crews, who learned their frontal armour could not protect them against standard American ammunition, faced a psychological crisis that tactical training could not address. Soldiers fight effectively when they possess confidence in their equipment and reasonable expectation of survival if they perform their duties competently. German Panzer IV crews in late 1944 lost both these foundations simultaneously. The knowledge that 80mm of frontal armour offered no protection against American 76mm guns at normal combat ranges destroyed the tactical security that had sustained crew morale through earlier fighting. Crews had accepted risks inherent in armoured combat when they believed their armour provided meaningful protection that allowed them to fight from positions of relative safety. Learning this protection was illusory, transformed every engagement into a desperate gamble where survival depended entirely on factors beyond crew control. Veteran German tankers interviewed decades after the war recalled the psychological impact of this realization with remarkable clarity. They described the moment when rumors about American gun effectiveness became confirmed facts through official channels and personal experience. The transition from confident professionals trusting their equipment to frightened soldiers recognizing their vulnerability occurred rapidly once crews began sharing experiences of Panzer IVs destroyed by frontal penetrations at ranges doctrine had assured them were safe. Oberfeldwebel Hans Becker, who commanded a Panzer IV in the 16th Panzer Division through the final year of the war, recorded his recollections in post-war interviews with military historians. He described receiving briefings in December 1944 that acknowledged American guns could penetrate Panzer IV frontal armour at ranges exceeding 1,500 meters. The briefing officer attempted to minimize concern by emphasizing proper tactical employment and superior German crew training, but Becker recalled that experienced crews immediately understood the implications. "We had relied on our armour," Becker stated in a 1978 interview. "We knew the Americans had numbers, artillery, and air power, but we believed our tanks protected us if we fought intelligently and used terrain properly. Learning that their standard guns could destroy us frontally at any combat range changed everything. We were no longer panzer crews with protected vehicles. We were targets waiting to be hit. This psychological transformation from protected warriors to vulnerable targets rippled through German armoured units during the winter of 1944 to 1945, contributing to the combat effectiveness decline that German commanders noted in their reports. Crews who believed their equipment was inadequate fought cautiously, hesitated at critical moments, and looked for opportunities to surrender rather than continue hopeless combat against superior forces. The contrast with American tank crew morale proved stark and militarily significant. American crews in autumn 1944 had gained confidence through 6 months of sustained combat that taught them they could defeat German armour through proper tactics, effective use of their improved guns, and support from the combined arms system surrounding them. This confidence translated into aggressive tactics, willingness to engage German tanks directly, and persistent pressure that gave German units no respite. American after-action reports from operations in late 1944 and early 1945 documented this transformation in American tank crew behavior. Company commanders noted that crews volunteered for dangerous missions, pressed attacks aggressively when opportunities appeared, and demonstrated initiative in exploiting tactical advantages. The contrast with American tank crew behavior in Normandy 6 months earlier was remarkable and reflected the cumulative impact of experience, improved equipment, and growing confidence. The final irony of the Panzer IV vulnerability story lay in timing. German intelligence had possessed fragmentary information about American 76mm gun performance throughout mid-1944, but failed to analyze it systematically or distribute findings effectively. Until autumn, when Weber's translation work and Aracourt combat results forced recognition. By the time German tank crews learned their vehicles were vulnerable, Germany's strategic position had deteriorated beyond any hope of recovery, regardless of tactical adjustments. Had German intelligence recognized American gun capabilities earlier, perhaps in summer 1944. The knowledge might have influenced tactical doctrine and training before the Normandy campaign concluded. Crews might have adjusted their engagement techniques and defensive positioning to compensate for recognized vulnerabilities. But even earlier recognition would not have changed the fundamental strategic reality. Germany lacked industrial capacity to produce better tanks in adequate numbers or to sustain armoured operations against the overwhelming material superiority Allied forces brought to bear. The Panzer IV represented German armoured doctrine from an earlier phase of the war, when Germany possessed temporary advantages in tactics and training sufficient to overcome material limitations. By late 1944, those temporary advantages had evaporated, exposing fundamental weaknesses in German industrial capacity and strategic planning. The Panzer IV became obsolete not because German engineers designed it poorly, but because the operational environment evolved beyond its capabilities, and Germany could not adapt rapidly enough to remain competitive. American 76mm gun development illustrated the American approach to weapon systems that proved devastatingly effective. Recognizing inadequacy in existing equipment, American ordnance engineers designed improvements and brought them into production rapidly. Within months, thousands of improved guns reached combat units, providing capabilities that addressed recognized deficiencies. This cycle of recognition, development, production, and deployment occurred continuously throughout the war, across all equipment categories. German industry could not match this adaptive capability while fighting a multi-front war against opponents with superior resources. German weapon development focused on sophisticated designs that pushed technical boundaries, but required extended development periods and complex manufacturing processes. When these weapons finally reached production, they often incorporated capabilities no longer relevant to current combat requirements, while lacking features that battlefield experience had proven essential. The Panther tank exemplified this German approach. Designed to counter Soviet T-34 tanks encountered on the Eastern Front in 1941, the Panther entered production in late 1942 and reached combat units in summer 1943. By this time, the operational environment had evolved substantially. Allied air superiority made daytime movement dangerous. Fuel shortages limited operational mobility. Spare parts scarcity meant mechanical reliability mattered more than peak performance. The Panther's impressive specifications proved less valuable than reliability, ease of maintenance, and moderate fuel consumption that the design sacrificed in pursuit of technical superiority. The Panzer IV, designed years earlier with more modest performance goals, actually suited late-war operational requirements better than the Panther in many respects. Its automotive reliability, ease of maintenance, and moderate fuel consumption made it more practical for sustained operations under resource-constrained conditions. The fundamental problem was that its armor protection had become inadequate against weapons it now faced regularly, a problem that could not be addressed through tactical adjustments or crew training improvements. German armored forces entered 1945 with equipment increasingly unsuited to the combat environment they faced. Panzer IVs offered inadequate protection. Panthers broke down frequently and consumed fuel Germany could not provide. Tigers existed in minimal numbers and required maintenance support beyond what field units could provide. The few advanced designs, like the King Tiger or Jagdpanther, arrived too late and in numbers too small to affect outcomes. Germany's armoured forces fought the final battles with equipment they knew was inadequate, against opponents whose material superiority made German defeat inevitable, regardless of tactical skill or operational art. The human cost of this equipment inadequacy appeared starkly in casualty statistics from late 1944 and early 1945. German tank crew losses increased dramatically as protective value of armour declined and tactical situations forced crews into unfavourable engagements. Units reported that crew replacement could not keep pace with casualties, forcing reassignment of infantry soldiers or crew members from other branches to fill vacant positions in tanks. These inadequately trained replacements died even more rapidly than the veterans they replaced, creating a death spiral that destroyed unit effectiveness. Panzer IV crews faced particularly high casualty rates because their tanks were deployed most frequently and offered least protection. Commanders used Panzer IVs for missions requiring reliable vehicles that could reach objectives without mechanical failure, placing them in situations where American 76mm guns could engage them effectively. The result was steady attrition that eliminated experienced crews and degraded unit combat power continuously. Medical records from German military hospitals treating tank crew casualties documented the types of wounds that became increasingly common. Penetrating injuries from armor fragments when shells struck but did not fully penetrate became more frequent as American gun performance improved and German armor quality declined. Burns from fuel fires increased as damaged tanks became more likely to ignite when penetrated. The medical data painted a grim picture of tank combat's increasingly lethal nature for German crews fighting in obsolete equipment. The liberation of German tank crew prisoners captured during final operations provided Allied intelligence with comprehensive understanding of German morale and combat effectiveness decline. Interrogation reports noted that prisoners expressed relief at having survived the war, showing little of the defiant National Socialist ideology that had characterized prisoners captured earlier in the conflict. Tank crew prisoners specifically mentioned equipment inadequacy and hopelessness of continued resistance as factors that influenced their decision to surrender when opportunities arose. These interrogation reports revealed that German tank crews possessed accurate understanding of their strategic situation by early 1945. Crews knew Germany had lost the war. They recognized their equipment could not compete effectively against Allied armor, supported by overwhelming material advantages. They understood that continued fighting meant near certain death or severe injury for minimal military effect. Many crews actively looked for opportunities to surrender to Western Allied forces, rather than continue combat they knew was hopeless. The contrast between this psychological state and German tank crew morale in earlier war years illustrated how thoroughly German armoured forces had been broken by sustained combat against materially superior opponents. In 1940 and 1941, German tank crews had possessed confidence bordering on arrogance, believing their tactical skill and adequate equipment made them invincible. By 1945, survivors possessed no illusions about their situation or chances, fighting only from discipline, fear of consequences for desertion, or inability to find ways to escape combat. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe. The final German surrender on May 8, 1945 ended organized resistance and allowed comprehensive assessment of German armored forces' condition. Allied intelligence officers examining surrendered German tank units found operational readiness rates below 10% in most formations, with many units possessing no functional vehicles whatsoever. Panzer IV units that had numbered dozens of tanks months earlier could field only 2 or 3 operational vehicles by war's end. Examination of abandoned and destroyed Panzer IVs littering battlefields across Germany revealed the cumulative impact of American 76mm gun effectiveness. Numerous vehicles showed frontal penetrations through armor that should have provided protection, according to earlier German doctrine. The entry holes, typically 7.5 centimeters in diameter with characteristic pataling of the armor around the impact point, confirmed that American guns had achieved penetrations regularly at the ranges Weber's analysis had predicted months earlier. Post-war technical intelligence programs brought captured German tank crews and American tank crews together for discussions about combat experiences and equipment effectiveness. These exchanges, conducted in prisoner-of-war camps and later at technical facilities, provided insights into how each side perceived the other's capabilities. German crews expressed surprise at how effectively American tank crews had learned to employ their equipment, noting that American proficiency had improved dramatically from Normandy through the final battles. American crews acknowledged that German tanks possessed impressive technical specifications in many respects, but emphasized that reliability, maintainability, and adequate support mattered more than peak performance. They noted that their Shermans, while not technically superior to German heavy armor, worked consistently and received the logistical support necessary for sustained operations. Several American tank commanders stated that they would prefer a reliable Sherman with adequate firepower over a technically superior German tank that broke down frequently and lacked spare parts. These post-war discussions revealed that both sides recognized the same fundamental truth about armored warfare. Technical specifications mattered, but operational effectiveness depended more on reliability, logistics, crew training, and combined arms integration. Germany had pursued technical sophistication at the expense of practical operational capability. America had pursued adequate technical performance, combined with excellent reliability and overwhelming logistical support. The American approach proved decisive in sustained combat against opponents with limited resources. The Panzer IV's story, from effective medium tank to vulnerable liability, encapsulated Germany's strategic failure in armored warfare and broader military operations. German forces began the war with temporary advantages in doctrine, training, and adequate equipment that enabled remarkable victories. These advantages masked fundamental weaknesses in industrial capacity, resource access, and sustainable military power. As the war progressed and opponents adapted, temporary advantages evaporated while fundamental weaknesses remained and intensified. By late 1944, when German crews learned their Panzer IV armor could not protect them from American 76mm guns at combat ranges, this recognition merely confirmed what strategic analysis had already revealed. Germany could not win a sustained material conflict against opponents possessing superior industrial capacity and resource access. The tactical revelation about Panzer IV vulnerability symbolized the broader strategic reality that German military forces fought with inadequate equipment against materially superior enemies, who were improving continuously while German capabilities declined. The human tragedy of German tank crews fighting in equipment they knew was obsolete resonates through historical accounts and memoirs. Young soldiers, conscripted into military service and trained to operate complex machines, found themselves sent into combat in vehicles that offered no protection against weapons they faced daily. Many died in their tanks, killed by penetrations through armor that doctrine had assured them would provide safety. Survivors carried memories of comrades burned alive when fuel tanks ignited, crushed when turrets were blown off by ammunition explosions, or killed by armor fragments when shells struck without fully penetrating. These experiences shaped post-war German military thinking profoundly. West German armed forces, established in the 1950s, emphasized realistic assessment of capabilities, honest evaluation of equipment performance, and integration within NATO alliance structures that provided collective security Germany could not achieve independently. German tank design philosophy, exemplified by the Leopard 1 and later Leopard 2 main battle tanks, prioritized reliability and maintainability alongside combat performance, explicitly learning from Panzer IV and Panther experiences. The American 76mm gun served effectively through the remainder of World War II and into the Korean War, where it proved devastatingly effective against Soviet-built T-34, 85 tanks in North Korean and Chinese service. The gun's performance validated American ordnance development philosophy that emphasized adequate performance, rapid development cycles, and integration with effective combined arms systems. Modern American tank gun development continues following these principles, prioritizing practical effectiveness over theoretical maximum performance. The story of German crews discovering their Panzer IV vulnerability serves as a case study in how intelligence failures, doctrinal rigidity, and industrial inadequacy combined to create military defeat. Weber's analysis in November 1944 revealed truths German High Command had failed to recognize despite fragmentary evidence available months earlier. The delay in recognition cost German armored forces dearly, but earlier recognition would not have changed strategic outcomes. Germany's fundamental disadvantages in industrial capacity and resources made defeat inevitable, once temporary tactical advantages were overcome by opponents who adapted and improved continuously. The Panzer IV fought from Poland in 1939 to Berlin in 1945, evolving from adequate medium tank to vulnerable liability as the operational environment changed and German capabilities declined. Crews, who trusted their armor protection, learned too late that American guns had eliminated that advantage, forcing them to fight in equipment that could not protect them against weapons they encountered daily. Their experience illustrated the human cost of strategic failures and industrial inadequacies that doomed Germany, regardless of individual courage or tactical skill, demonstrated by soldiers serving in impossible circumstances. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.